Today, you guys are all here for the Weapons of Wellness POC event. I did one earlier this year. It was virtual, and the goal of this event is to have an interactive, intersectional, and proactive mental health experience. What was your first experience or introduction to mental health? And what was your first experience or introduction with mental hygiene? I'm going to start with you, Greg.
Just to tie it into race a little bit, in Asian families, you don't really express that much emotion. Just growing up, we never talked about it. I didn't talk about that stuff with my parents. I didn't really even talk about it with my siblings, a little bit, because they also fenced, but we didn't talk about our feelings to each other. That's not something that we weren't raised that way. So I had to develop sort of my own ways of doing it. I'd say the first time I felt sort of like some struggles emotionally was through fencing. It's the thing that you love the most can also bring you the most pain and grief. So I think for me, in terms of mental health, it was really fencing that really forced me to start thinking about those things and how it impacted my happiness, my satisfaction in life, my life decisions. For mental hygiene, in terms of how to maintain your mental or emotional well-being, I think, again, just bringing it back to fencing, I had to develop my own sort of coping mechanisms or ways to deal with the stresses of doing the sport.
Yeah, I think a lot of us who are fencers can relate to experiencing a lot of new and intense emotions in fencing. And even though we don't die, it sometimes feels like a life or death situation that can bring out a lot of very real and intense feelings that we then have to learn to cope with.
Mental health, something like from a Caribbean family. So again, you don't really talk. It's like do what you're told, and you just kind of rock out. So I think for me, mental health probably started with fencing as well, or like just performance, right? Just wanting to perform at a high level, and knowing how I had to feel beforehand to be able to perform. I think as I got older and just understanding pressures to perform better, that's when I started kind of paying more attention to mental hygiene and, building proactive kind of frameworks that allow me to bring myself back where I need to be. One of them is actually speaking to Lisa, of course. So, I'd say that's for me, fencing as well.
Yeah, and I love how you kind of both mentioned like coming from cultures or environments where you don't really talk about mental health or emotions. If you only associate mental health with dysfunction or possibly having an issue that is unfixable with you, like you're flawed, then you will never get to that point of being able to positively impact your health. And then if you ever experience mental dysfunction, you might think something's wrong with me versus, oh, this is something I can actually work on and improve and feel better about.
I had a mother who talked about it all the time. Like in some ways she was like an unlicensed psychologist, but she was amazing. She could take the craziest family dynamic or thing that happened and explain it and make it understandable. And it wasn't really until I was a junior in college where I had my first experience with mental hygiene, where my amazing mother, her mother had just died. And so she was dealing with the trauma of her mother dying. They had had a rough relationship and didn't sleep. And as a result of that, ended up having a psychotic break. And so our family had to then figure out what to do in that moment, which was absolutely terrifying. Because it was the first time we had dealt with something so serious and it happened really fast and we had to deal with it. And I remember being an RA and my hall director said to me, "You need to go to therapy immediately." It altered the course of my life, but this is the reason why I became a psychologist. It changed the trajectory of my own life, and so I think it was that moment. And even though we talk about a lot of times with mental health in the moment of crisis, sometimes those crises, if we do the right thing with them, if we get the kind of help that we need, they can change our lives forever.
Being so accomplished, right? Greater success can also easily start to become a source of anxiety and pressure. As someone who has accomplished very much, how is reconciling moments where you feel like accomplishing something new or greater or performing well is an expectation?
Definitely when you're young, everything is new. And many times you chase success for reasons that may not even be healthy. Like many times, like unhealthy things actually lead to being really successful. the journey, the place I'm in now is just really being successful for myself, and figuring out what that means for me as opposed to external things, right? Because the things you do in the past are amazing, but trying to recreate the past never really works. I think my biggest talent with fencing is really just, or in life, is probably just figuring out how to get from point A to point Z. That's like my biggest thing. I'm generally pretty good at creating systems for me to function in, and finding ways for that to be successful. So I think that's like the main thing. It's just really kind of programmatizing things and figuring out what works for you, and how to not try to relive the past, but try to take lessons you've learned in the past to kind of recreate the future in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I also really like what you said about the things that allow us to be successful in one way may be damaging us and hurting us in other ways. Because I know for myself, I used to win a lot, and my whole motto was beating people. But every time I lost, I felt beaten. And that was super hard for me. And so I kind of had to move away from that mindset because, yeah, I was winning, but at what cost? What are other ways that you motivate and find success in your kind of daily life and also in your competitive life?
Yeah, I think another, as you were saying that, I was thinking like another thing that I've like always been really, really big on is learning on someone else's dime. So like for me, Keith Smart like taught me so, we had the same coach for the longest time, but he taught me so much in terms of like even ways to navigate with my coach because he'd gone through that, or different things I've come up with in competitions that like I wouldn't think of as a 16, 17, 18-year-old that like he could kind of put game on for me. I look at like Ali, right? He didn't win fights at a really high level at a certain point in his career, but he was more transcendent in other ways. Or Michael Jordan, I think, went 6 years in between his three-peats. So I always try to look at things like Kobe Bryant, one of my favorite athletes, 5 years between championships. So I just always try to kind of think about the process and look to people who have done what you're doing or trying to do what you're doing as opposed to like everyone else, because when you're talking about success on a high level, very few people are trying to reach that in a sustainable way. So I don't know if I answered.
I think I also really appreciated you naming some of the people who have had success, but success is not linear.
Yeah.
And success at a certain point, if you're doing something for long enough, can't just be defined by winning things. You do it every day.
Yeah.
You train every day. You live every day. So you're not only living in these one moments where you win something, but you have to figure out, why are you doing these things in the first place?
But I remember even before I made like my first Grand Prix top 4, I think I lost in the top 8 13 straight times. And I was like so annoyed. And the talk then was like, you'll never make a top 4, right? And then like literally. And I was so frustrated that like a bar of soap, right? And if you're in the shower and you're squeezing it too tight, you're never gonna be able to take a shower. It's gonna keep slipping out, right? So I just try my best when I'm trying to achieve things to like keep my focus, but also just not to squeeze too tight, because that's like my parental upbringing is just to squeeze tight and go. And it's just that sometimes you just have to like let things rock and let them take time and be patient.
Something you said about having years of success and dead periods and then being able to recover from those kind of transitions us to our next question with Greg. The title is Third Time May Be the Charm, but how do you continue after attempts 1 and 2? So between 1996 and 2004, you made 3 attempts to make the Olympic team, a process that is as grueling as it is long, because in fencing, the Olympic process is a whole year and like 12 to 14 tournaments. And it wasn't until your 3rd attempt that you succeeded at that. So what was it like to fall short twice, and how did it affect you mentally? And also, how did you recover from those falls or from those, falling short of that goal, and then continue to move forward?
I was the guy that was, probably perennially like ranked 6 through 12 or worse. And so I was just always the guy who was sort of on the doorstep. But it didn't mean that I didn't dream about it or think that I could do it. NBC in 1988, they broadcast a little bit of the Olympics, and I remember seeing Charioni fence, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And there were a couple women from the 88 women's foil team who were training in Boston, and I got to meet them very early on when I started fencing, and I was just so for whatever reason, that it just hooked me. And I knew that this is something that I have to do, that I have to be good at. And I don't know why. Do any of us know why we love fencing so much? we just love it because it just connects with us somehow. And so for me, I think what kept me going through all those years of just not making the cadet team, not making the junior team, not making World University Games or any senior team, it was just I had this love of fencing so much, and I just couldn't stop. Like I was saying before, like the thing that you love the most can also bring you so much pain, because when you dream about something so big, you're like, oh, I didn't do it again. I didn't do it again. Or like I was also pretty inconsistent. Sometimes, I do really well, but then, go out in the pools, or it would be so crazy. But I think for me, and this goes into the initial question, like thinking about mental health and mental hygiene, I just said to myself, hey, listen, Greg, you know you're not going to quit fencing. So for me, I knew quitting was not an option. Not trying was not an option. So I said, if you're not going to quit, then you just have to accept that this is going to be an insane process, and you have to accept that, you'll probably fail. Like your dreams may not come true. But once you sort of get to that point where you're like, you know what, I can accept whatever happens, then you can really be free. And I know I love this sport. I know I love the people. So I'm just going to keep going until it's not feasibly for me anymore with the rest of my life. So it's kind of like those two things, like just really knowing that I loved the sport and I had this dream, and to coming to that state of acceptance of, okay, this is not going to be easy. I can accept that it's a crazy process with ups and downs, and I can accept myself for whatever happens. Like I learned to have pride in just putting myself out there, putting myself on the line.
To emphasize your narrative of acceptance, because he made all these sacrifices for the opportunity to fence, did not do as well as he wanted to, but having peace with that you made the sacrifices, you decided to put yourself in a position. Now, whether it works out or not, that's a whole another thing that you can't necessarily control.
Right.
But I really like that piece of acceptance, and I think it ties into mental health, physical health in general. I think a lot of times we have more, particularly mental health issues, when we have problems in our life, whether they're physical, social, and mental, and we don't accept that they're happening or don't accept that our lives are changing, and it causes like further discontent and disruption. But really just accepting that the challenges are going to be what they are, and you have to decide whether you're going to do them or not, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Because for me, the choice was, I would feel worse if I didn't try. So the choice is really between not trying and trying. It's not really between. At some point, I was like, I can't control whether I make the team, and these other guys, if they're better than me, then they deserve to go. They're the ones that deserve to go. So.
And as someone who works with many successful individuals in competitive environments, you not only understand the qualities and practices that foster success, but also the environments that create harmful internal and external situations for people. So what do you think the mental benefits are of these competitive environments, or the mental opportunities? And then what do you think the possible pitfalls or kind of detriments that they can have on people? So like, what are the pros and cons in terms of mental health in these competitive environments?
That's a huge question. I'm not sure I can answer it in its entirety. But I think I will say that clearly you can see that, being in a rigorous competitive environment can teach you to be successful in a variety of realms. It doesn't have to be just fencing. You can take those skills and put them anywhere. You can become a doctor. You can work on marketing and advertising. You could put on events. There's a million things you can do with those. They're very, very transferable skills. And I think that's a really critical piece about it. I think, in terms of the competitive environment, the negative pieces of it, there are a ton of negative pieces of it in terms of like toxic competition, toxic environments, ways of behaving that aren't super healthy, poor communication skills. There's a gajillion things we could talk about negatively. I do also think one of the things that's important to talk about it, because fencing is a very consumptive sport. There are sports you can play that are not as consumptive, that you can actually do and live other lives, and fencing is a very consumptive sport. One of the things I'm most interested in psychologically, I think, when being in the fencing community, is really helping people take their love for fencing, because not all of you will like Gregory was talking about, not all of you will marry your first love. Some of you will have to move on.